When the transit wheels grind to a stop in New York City, it's worldwide news. News. New York City.
FAQ.
Hello? Hello. It's FAQ.NYC. I'm Harry Siegel, here with Professor Christina Greer, and joining us right now is Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams. Let's get to it.
News. New York City.
FAQ.
Eric Adams, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Let's jump right in. I want to read 3 quotes from you. The first is from February of 2018, when you said the term gentrification is being used to, quote, demonize the evolution of a community. Brooklyn is going to change and evolve. What we must do is make sure we do not forcefully move people out, which allows the natural transition of a community. Then going on, you said, instead of that attitude, I don't want another person who doesn't look like me, talk like me, speak like me, and eat the same food as me, listen to the same sound, the same music. We should be open and welcome the beauty of this thing we have in Brooklyn. Then this month, January 2020, you said, part of a longer speech in Manhattan on MLK Day, people are hijacking your apartments and displacing your living arrangements as they displace your conversations, and said that things that are important to you are no longer important, and they decide what's important and what's not important. Go back to Iowa, you go back to Ohio. New York City belongs to the people that was here and made New York City what it is. And then, about a week after that, in an open letter in the Daily News to the newest New Yorkers, you offered some context for those remarks, but at least as I read it, tell me if I'm wrong, didn't retract or apologize for them. You wrote, "We don't vilify people based on where they come from. We seek to build bridges between communities and celebrate what unites us." And then you said about gentrification can't just be summed up in charts and numbers. It has a real human cost. It gradually makes longtime residents feel like strangers in the communities they've known for years. Try to imagine the psychological toll this takes. Government agencies are often weaponized to speed up the process of gentrification instead of combating it. So I'm hoping that you can help explain how those views fit together and the context they came from, or how your views have changed over the last couple of years.
First of all, I think my views are consistent. And if you look at the narrative is consistent. I am a supporter of the evolution of a community. There's no denying that if you went to Brownsville many years ago, it was predominantly Jewish. Actually, there was a movie, Tough Jews, and you could still see some of the Star Davis on many of the buildings. If you go to Sunset Park, you see the evolution, the large Chinese community, the large influx of Mexican Americans and immigrants that are there. And even in Williamsburg, you see the evolution of those communities. And so the inviting part of the evolution of the community is important. But if you go back and look at the narrative of what happens far too often, when you saw the Brownsvilles changing, the East New York's changing, you saw disinvestment. But when you look at what's happening with gentrification, you're seeing just the opposite. You shouldn't get new roads when the community starts to gentrify. One of the best examples is what the MTA is doing in their capital program along the Long Island Railroad. They didn't put any capital dollars into East New York. They, however, put capital dollars into Nostrand and Atlantic Avenue, which is the start of the gentrification. You have a nice little market there, and the demographics of the community is changing. And so once you get on the ground and do a real analysis of the impact of gentrification, people think just housing. It's more than housing. It is about really moving your conversation. When I did that initiative of mothers coming to my office telling me about rats biting their babies and showing me bite marks from their children by rats. And I went over the country and said, can we find a device to deal with the rat infestation? And we were able to put it in place as a pilot project and killed 107 rats. And then we wanted to put the pilot project into nitrogen development. It was folks coming over and said, why are you killing rats? So those things that are important to everyday residents. We have a welcome sign to New York, but how about being welcome to the people who were there? And I think my comments of the evolution of the community is so important. I will continue to say that.
No, sorry, just as a follow-up.
Yes.
Mothers were saying, why are you killing the rats? Because killing the rats would actually invite newcomers into their neighborhood?
No, they were, what I'm saying is how you hijack the things that are important to the residents. That was a top issue to those residents. Those who are not dealing with the issues of rat infestation that are living in NYCHA, they were hijacking the conversation that these everyday people who are there, they were saying these are important. So I'm showing how it's not only losing your apartment, it's losing those issues that you're saying are important. Maybe you may not be as savvy enough, maybe you may not be Twitter savvy, or how to use social media, or how to organize, but your issues are important just as those who are very savvy and getting their issues out on the forefront.
So when you brought up gentrification in 2018, you
Yes.
said the term was being used to demonize the evolution of a community.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm reading your open letter to the newest New Yorkers, and you're talking about government agencies being weaponized to speed up the process of gentrification instead of combating it. I'm trying to understand the consistency in that, and I'm also really interested, because you sort of refer to the damage it does there, about noise complaints, for instance, rising pretty rapidly in gentrifying areas, and you point to a restaurant owner, who might have to shut down. If there's sort of specific examples of that damage that you can point to.
Yes, there's a couple of examples of it. And the demonizing, using the tools of government. One of the best examples, there's several examples, but one of the best examples is what happened to Fernando Mateo. $6 million he invested into La Marina. Just about every top elected official experienced the beauty of that place, large African-American, Caribbean population, that whole stretch of property. If you go up there now and you look at what happened to those local Dominican businessmen who opened restaurants, establishments there, they cleaned up the area. The area, when I was in the police department, that area was a drug zone. People used to OD, many drug problems. They cleaned up the area. New people moved into the area. They didn't want the traffic. They didn't want the people going into the area. So they got the police department to put barriers and roadblocks 10 blocks away from the restaurant so people could no longer drive down to the water edge. And they used the police to stop them from being able to use the place. They used the state liquor authority to go in. He had over 70-something summonses. 90% of them were found nothing wrong. He had 300 employees. They closed down the spot. He lost his 300 employees, lost their jobs. He lost his $6 million investment. Then they gave it to a white person to run the facility to change the dynamic of those who attended. Right in Brooklyn, on Flatbush and 6th Avenue, an establishment with black professionals, just about every black elected official and white elected officials used the place to host events. It was called Woodlands. They used to have a line out front, very orderly, no disruption. Then there was a lot of criticism about the establishment. They used the state liquor authority, the police. I had a meeting with the community residents, with the police and the state liquor authority and the Department of Environmental Protection. I said, do we have any crimes coming from this place? Are they over the noise complaints? Is there issue with this place? All the agencies that stated no still collaborated in having the place closed down. The number of Caribbean establishments in Flatbush Avenue who have been in place for years are now saying that they're having constant raids by the police, constant raids by the fire department, constant raids by the Department of Building, being hit with summonses, told they get noise complaints for 311. So long as all of these long established businesses and economic drivers employing low-skilled young men and women in these communities are now being hit, and they're being closed because new arrivals no longer want to be a part of the communities. The West Indian Day Parade has been there for years. Now there's complaints in my office. We don't believe the parade should be on Eastern Parkway anymore. My Jewish constituents that dance in the street during the holiday season. Why do they have to dance in the street during the holiday season? You don't come in a community and displace the culture of the community. You come in and become a part of the community.
So as Brooklyn Borough President, and are we correct in saying that you would like to be the 110th mayor of New York City at some point in time? So then how do you circle that square, right? I mean, we know that we're going to have an influx of new folks coming in. We know that gentrification is real on the residential and commercial levels. We know that it's not always a white face. I mean, I'm being real. I'm a gentrifier
Yeah.
to my new Brooklyn neighborhood.
We both are.
So how do you then negotiate with real estate agents and corporations to not only invest in the borough, but also make sure that the individuals that are coming respect the history and the individuals who are there?
I think that's a powerful question. That's an excellent question because it's not, and I really want to say it's not just apartments. It's about a conversation. And what we're doing, like similar to what we're doing prior to the Dr. King speech, and I want to talk on that for a moment, we put in place after the increase in hate crimes, the increase in how people are treated, both Jewish and non-Jewish, we're doing something called Breaking Bread, Building Bonds. 100 dinners all over the city, 10 people at each dinner. Each individual at the table is coming from a different cultural, ethnic, religious, and lifestyle to compel people to talk to each other, interact with each other. It is unbelievable to me as I move around the borough in the city how much people don't even engage in each other, don't even respect the norms of different environments. And we want to foster that conversation because we have to. Something simple as good morning or why am I angry that your dog is crapping on my yard and you refuse to pick it up? Or, how we have a school that's 85% of one group, and yet you have classrooms inside that school that are just made of one particular group. And that is not how we can continue to move forward. So there's a combination of having real affordable housing. What we have put in a stamp in my borough president's office. We put over $50 million into housing because we know how important it is. Sustaining NYCHA. Many of these communities, if you look, the gentrification in these communities have NYCHA at the heart of them, and we have to protect NYCHA and give it the quality that it deserves. And then to make sure landlords are not illegally evicting tenants. We're not doing a good job on that. We need to start arresting and put landlords in perp walks to understand you're not going to do illegal eviction, which is a crime. Arson to burn people out, which is a crime. Criminal mischief, damaging property, have people removed, which is a crime. We need to be more aggressive. I spoke with all of my district attorneys and communicated with them. We have to start using the criminal statutes that are on the books now to let landlords know that it's not going to be the cost of doing business when you displace people, when you illegally raise their rent, when you take these affordable housing off the roll. We have to be more aggressive about it to stabilize the hemorrhaging of apartments.
I just want to ask you one more thing about Fernando Mateo before we get to policing and perp walks and some questions around that. So he had beef with the NYPD going back to Bloomberg and Kelly about over enforcement. I also know that in the account, at least of the New York Post, that he had been bundling money for de Blasio in the course of trying to get an associate put on, and in the course of dealing with some of those issues with how his restaurant was being policed. Is that like a right and appropriate way for a constituent to deal with the set of problems, or is that problematic? Like how should I understand that? And am I right that you're saying that the complaints about La Marina were coming from outside of the the community that's long been there uptown?
Right. The long-term residents who were there patronized the place. It was a beautiful establishment. Like I stated, he invested $6 million. And this is an example of what happens throughout the entire city where you see communities change that are changing. La Marina was a well-established place with 300 employees. New people moved into Washington Heights and decided that they don't like the La Marina anymore. They used their skills to have police respond, state liquor authority respond, and other city agencies to go in, give him a large number of summonses, have the police use their resources to block the roads that led to La Marina, the restaurant. Think about that for a moment. We had police officers that were having roadblocks, not allowing cars to drive down to his establishment. That is not how we should be using police services. I'm an ex-police officer. That is unacceptable to me. And to use the police to break a business, a legitimate business. If he was committing a crime, let's close it down. But a legitimate business, you stop patrons from going to that business. That is not what we should be using police services for. And when I look at that pattern and I sit down with these various restaurants and businesses throughout the city, I'm seeing the same pattern. Using police, using state liquor authority, because the number of complaints that are being received, so that you're using city agencies to go after legitimate businesses. Now, when you talk about his bundling of money for the mayor or Bill de Blasio, he was not convicted of a crime. Anyone can make an accusation of someone, and I'm always careful about when someone makes an accusation, because you can't take it back. He didn't commit a crime.
He said that he was bundling though, so
Right.
this wasn't treated criminally. Like, you know, the rules on that are pretty clear. Like, so really, I think it's just a question here of whether or not you think that's good and appropriate, not whether or not he was convicted of a crime.
Okay.
That we know the
Now,
answer.
what's good and appropriate for people to
For
bundle
a business owner to bundle that way while they're trying to shift how, you know, the NYPD and others are dealing with their establishment.
I'm not seeing the connection, because if a legitimate business owner makes the determination that he wants to bundle, which is legal, for a particular candidate, that business owner should have the right to do so. That is within the campaign finance rules. You have to report your bundling. You have to follow the procedures. Individuals have bundled for me, and they followed all the rules that is attached to bundling. Now, I want to go back to the Dr. King speech, because it was a speech, and that speech
You can
rolled.
hear the whole thing online, by the way, and I encourage listeners to do so that they can get the context that you know, these couple of lines came from.
Exactly. And built into that speech, I laid out how I got to where I was, what is happening in this city, that a large body of people are being left behind, and is only going to get extremely more complicated when we start looking at the impact of artificial intelligence, which is a show you could probably do on its own. You know, it's no secret that Oxford University is stating 47% of the jobs that we are training our babies for now won't be around in 20 years. This is not Eric's study. This is what Oxford University is saying. Yet we have bodies of people in this city that are being left behind, and the issues that are important to them that are being ignored, such as Black women are more likely to die from maternal morbidity, 12 times the rate as white women. And we don't see a crisis going on. My speech was around the ignorance of the crises, and crises don't become acknowledged until it's not in the communities of color or economically challenging communities. That was what my speech was about. And people say, well, you should not be making that speech on Dr. King days. Like hell, I shouldn't. That's when it was supposed to be made. People want to rewrite history. King was one of the most hated men in America. And go back and Google me. Every paper in this city was attacking me when I was talking about stop and frisk. They wrote editorials about me. They wrote columns about me. I was called racist. I was demonized when I was in the police department, talking about that what we were doing to Black and brown boys in the city was wrong. 1 million Black and brown boys being stopped. I was demonized in the state Senate when I was talking about bail reform, that we should not be handcuffing women when they're pregnant and they're in the hospital. I was demonized when I was a sergeant, and I wrote protests at Rockefeller Plaza with Randy Credico to say that we need to stop the Rockefeller drug laws. And then I went to Albany, and I was one of the co-founders of the bill. So there's a history of people saying, we don't like Eric Adams. Eric Adams is a racist. We hate Eric Adams. That's fine, you know?
So this is a great launch point, because if my memory serves me correctly, if, let's just say, you're successful as the 110th mayor of New York City, in recent memory, you would be the first police officer who's mayor of New York City?
Of my knowledge, I would be, and yes, you're right. Now that I think about it.
Okay, so
not only police officer, which is very interesting that you stated, I probably would be the first blue-collar employee. All the traditional men who have been the mayors of this city, if you look under my fingernail, you see the dirt and grime of climbing up that mountain one hand at a time. I didn't come from a political machine. I didn't come from a civil, this great movement towards. No, it's been a hustle. It's been a hustle that included being arrested at 15, being beat by cops so bad that my brother and I urinated blood for weeks. It came from being told by the leaders of the National Black United Front, we want you to go into the police department and become a police officer. I didn't want to do that. I was still experiencing PTSD. But I went in, and from day one, I fought the racism of the police department. So it came from, trying to fire me as a captain. When I was promoted 3 times in the police department, when I became a captain, they wanted to fire me, Commissioner Kelly, and I had a department trial. And when I finished that trial, the judge at that trial said, I wish you can be my state senator. So when you look at the legacy, the arc of my life, you'll see that it has been the same way.
So I think a lot of New Yorkers would respect that. I want to bring up something. I know some people don't like old business, but if we're going to be, running for mayor, I say let's bring it all up.
Yes.
So here's where I bristled.
Yes.
Because we know a lot of, not just Black communities, but a lot of communities feel a certain kind of way about police officers.
Yes.
NYPD in particular.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
MTA cops now in particular, because
Right.
they seem to, like to wield a baton and
Yes.
a gun, etc. So, but this is what made me have a lot of pause.
Okay.
After the tragic Pittsburgh synagogue massacre,
Yes.
the shooting, you said, this is in the Times, October 28th, 2018,
Mhm.
Brooklyn official says he will carry a gun whenever he enters a house of worship.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted you to pick apart that, let us know if that's what
Love
you
it.
still
Love
believe.
it.
But this was a conversation also at the time where they were saying, we got to arm teachers, we got to arm pastors. I
Right.
can barely work PowerPoint. I don't need to be carrying a
Right.
gun. I'm not, you obviously have a lot more training in handling these types of weapons.
Right.
But do we want to be a city where you go to FCBC or Abyssinian
Mhm.
or, whatever large or small synagogue or mosque or temple, and we're all packing heat when
Right,
we
right,
should just be
right.
meditating and reflecting?
First of all, this is such a good conversation because I'm able to unpack.
Welcome
who
to
I,
the podcast.
I'm able to unpack who I am. And first of all, this is what I said because people like to take what Eric has stated. I said to my pastors, my rabbis, my imams, in your bodies, there are law enforcement officers who attend your services. Those law enforcement officers should connect with the overall part of your service. Have them sit at a certain place so they can observe the entire event that's taking place, communicate with you, have the necessary signals. They're trained on how to respond to emergencies. My call is never for any and everybody. I'm not a supporter of teachers carrying guns. I'm not a supporter of people in the supermarket carrying guns. I'm talking about trained people inside. If you attend a house of worship of any kind and you are a trained law enforcement officer, FBI agent, NYPD, DEA agent, who we have gone through months of training on how to respond to emergencies. Those individuals should be part of your security apparatus. Why is that proven correctly? Look at the last shooting that happened inside the church. That last shooting, that person was not able to kill more people because you had a trained officer in there. Now, it's easy for us to state, I don't want anyone inside my house of worship with a gun. But let me tell you, if you start sitting in church and you start hearing the sound of an AK-47 piercing the bodies of people, ripping their bodies apart, and they're coming down the aisle, and you with your family member, your children, and you believe that person next to you is a trained police officer, he has a gun, not only are you going to pray for the safety of your children, you're going to pray that he has that gun. That's the real reality. People have figured out that if you hate Jews, go to synagogues. If you hate Christians, go to a church. If you hate Muslim, go to a mosque. People who go to pray should not be preyed upon. And I stand by that every day. When I go to church, I'm not walking around with my gun at my side, but I do have my firearm there. So if someone comes in there and wants to cause harm to innocent people, I'm going to defend them. The law gives me the right to carry a gun 24 hours, 7 days a week. And there are pastors and other religious leaders in this city They have trained law enforcement officers. Reverend Bernard, the largest church in this city, he wrote a joint op-ed with me of how he has trained law enforcement officers who carry their weapons and they're inside the church to protect the parishioners.
So as mayor, would you carry a firearm on you, even with a security detail?
Yes, I will, number one. And number two, I won't have a security detail. If the city is safe, the mayor shouldn't have a security detail with him. He should be walking the street by himself. Number three, the hypocrisy of those who are citywide officials who said that you shouldn't have guns in church. Those guys that walk in with them, they got guns. So there's a level of hypocrisy for a citywide official say no one should have a gun in the church, but they don't tell their people, hey, hang outside while I go inside. So if we could protect them in the church with a gun, then we could protect Miss Mary with her Bible with a gun.
Do you have on a gun right now?
No, I do not.
Like, this is
No,
a
I
legit
do not.
question.
I really
Okay.
carry.
Okay.
So there was a shooting in Brooklyn recently involving a law enforcement official off duty, authorized to carry. This was a Secret Service agent in my corner of Brooklyn, where the stables are, which you were very involved with.
Love that area.
So he shot a dog that was apparently off its leash. Is it sensible that we don't know the name of this law enforcement official? In fact, we don't even know that it's a Secret Service agent. The Secret Service just says it's an employee. The NYPD, speaking for attribution at least, just says talk to the Secret Service. Is that right and appropriate? Is there some concern that if you just have enough people carrying guns, that they can provide safety, but they can also really screw things up, as appears to have been the case here? And again, it's law enforcement, and so the usual burdens are a little different, and we don't even know this person's name several weeks later. It's not because people haven't been asking.
And I think that's inappropriate. I think transparency is crucial. Law enforcement officers are given two rights that are the most powerful rights you can give an American: the right to take away freedom and the right to take away a life. They should be scrutinized at a level that no other professional is scrutinized as. And if someone uses his or her gun, their name should be reported and that information should be given out. And that's why I joined with colleagues in the state lawmakers that stated there should be information on who the officers are that carry a firearm. This should not be private. You're given that right to carry, and people should know who you are.
So are the rules about officer transparency and disclosure going to change, both as a question of lobbying Albany and as a question of how you'd instruct your NYPD commissioner should you be mayor? And how?
Without a doubt. I'm clear that the instructions of the New York City Police Department is directly tied to what the mayor of the city of New York is capable of doing. And if you understand the intricacies of that agency and how historically that agency has believed that it is separate from the people that they serve and protect, that whole dynamic must change. We must use policing differently in this city. The agency is too powerful. It's one of the few 24 hours, 7 day a week institutions, and we're not using it effectively in this city. It could be used more proactively instead of using it as a reactionary tool in some area. We have done a great job in public safety, but how we police in some communities is different how we police in others. We need to be more uniform in providing the service of protection in our city, and we don't do a good job in doing that.
One more policing question, and then we've got a couple other quick topics to touch on as we get close to the end, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Dermot Shea,
we are his constituents, so we can be here all day if we really want to. We're both Brooklynites.
We pay your salary, sir. Dermot Shea, the police commissioner here, whose brother is the equivalent of the police commissioner in Jersey City, which is wild and something I'd love to talk with him about, with both of them about. But he says that bail reform is why robberies are way up so far, and it's very early this year. Murder's down 50% in these super early numbers. And he says, look, it's not like we've forgotten how to police. It's the people who, in his view, should be locked up and dealt with within that system aren't, and that they're going out and doing things. Obviously, the Post has been promoting a series of sort of poster boys for reforming bail reform as they see it. I'm just interested in how you would instruct a commissioner to both deal with public safety and that set of issues and to speak to the public about them should you become mayor.
Great question. I'm an advocate for bail reform. In fact, before it was popular, I was the chair of crime and correction. I visited many of our correctional facilities upstate. I would walk through the locations. Some of the inmates would yell out and say, "Hey, there's Eric Adams, the 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement guy." So I believe in bail reform. But public safety is a prerequisite to prosperity. We have to be safe. And I have a different view of the city than many people. I don't want Jordan my son, growing up in the city that I grew up in, where violence was real, 2,000 homicides a year, 98,000 robberies, and about 96,000 felonious assaults. Crime was real. When I do an analysis of the bail reform, all my misdemeanors shouldn't be any bail at all. There's no reason for that. When you look at the felonies, and I shared this with the advocates, there's certain felonies on there that are problematic. The felony of burglary. I don't want someone going into a person's home. You hear someone yelling from your child's room, a person's running out carrying something, and that person may have committed that burglary the day before, and the judge cannot do an analysis and say, hey, is this guy a serial burglar? Is he going to be a threat to the community that he's returning to, which predominantly high crime areas are economically challenging in Black and brown communities. And so we can't just put people back in those communities and ignore the fact that they may be a danger to the community. I believe we need to figure out, how do we allow the judge to do a real analysis to say, is this person an imminent threat to a community? I think those who are dealing with mental health issues, we have to better use the mental health court. They need to have facilities that they can go to if they are an imminent threat to themselves and an imminent threat to others. You look at also the crime of robbery too. Robbery too is a serious crime. Someone forcefully removing property from an innocent person. If this person has a history and they're going to continue to do those robberies, we can't just say we're just going to turn you back into the street. Look at
So does that come in the form of you appointing more judges as, let's just say you're mayor? Does that come in the form of you appointing more judges, you appointing more police? Like, how would you solve this issue?
We have to better use the courts, and we have to stop attacking judges when they make these decisions, which are really, you have to make a quick decision of hundreds of cases. So we immediately, a judge can rule right 100 times. They could do one case that turns out that they made a judgmental error, not an intentional error. And then all of a sudden, that judge is on the front page of the newspaper. All of a sudden, we demonize him or her, which is the wrong way to view the actions of being a judge, a standing judge. And then we got to really use the mental health court. A lot of these cases are dealing with people who are dealing with mental health issues. And if we're not making sure they're receiving wraparound services, if we're not making sure you have someone that's bipolar and extremely dangerous, if they're on their medication, they can actually perform a normal life. So we're not giving the real services that are needed when we talk about law enforcement. And I was talking to a young man, a captain, St. Fort in Brooklyn. We have a young person who gets arrested with a gun, 13-year-olds. We debrief that young person by asking him, does he know about any other criminal action? How about debriefing him to find out what's happening in his life? Are you homeless? Do you have family at home? Is your family living from shelter to shelter? That should be the debriefing. And then the police department should take that information and connect to the services that won't have this young person being a continual cycle in our system.
Now, does that come in the form of something a la Shirlane McCray's initiative with mental health? Is yours a more robust police, judicial, commissioner, neighborhood policing? I just want
I
you
like
to,
that. I like that. That's a good question.
Sketch it out for me. Like, what does that look like as you as a mayor with limited resources in some ways?
Yeah, that $1 billion to me could have been better utilized. Our city, and I say this often, our city is dysfunctional. One agency creates a crisis. The other agency responds to the crisis. Archbishop Desmond Tutu said it best. We spend a lifetime pulling people out of the river. How about going upstream and finding out why they're falling in the first place? So everyone is in a silo. Instead of the connection, it's not how much money we spend, it's what are we doing with the money we have. So my police, my law enforcement, my mental health institutions, my organizations, my nonprofits, we need to all be connected and operating on the same mission, and we're not. I'm blown away as I look at city government of the lack of connectivity. Just looking at the Department of Education. Department of Education feeds our healthcare crisis. 70% of 12-year-olds have early signs of heart disease because of the food we're feeding them in school. It's bad food. I got the city to move away from processed meat, serving it to our children. When you look at the law enforcement problem, 80% of the men and women at Rikers Island don't have a high school diploma, equivalency diploma. A third of the less than 18-year-olds read below a fifth grade reading level. 55% have a mental a learning disability. 40% are dyslexic. So if we stop being a crisis-driven city and start to deal with why people are falling into the river in the beginning, we won't have to spend the money we're spending downstream. And that is the mindset that I bring to politics. That's different from everyone else because I saw the evolution of a dysfunctional agency and made it functional.
There's a lot we could get into there, including your push to have universal gifted testing. I think we could probably spend an episode on your time working within the institution of the NYPD and how that played out. But in our very last minutes here,
Yes.
I want to ask you a couple of quick questions that are things you could definitely unpack at more length,
Yes.
but in brief.
Mhm.
It's 2020. We're many, many months away from November of 2021, but you are leading the fundraising race of the prospective mayoral candidates by a lot. At the same time, that's become a source of criticism, both because of money that's come in from developers, including the Lentices, and because of how your nonprofit has functioned. In brief, I'd just like to know what your response to those criticisms and how people should understand this as they're just starting to pay attention to the race.
And it's laughable. 88% of the people who donated to my campaign are not in the real estate space. People have donated from $5 to the maximum amount they could contribute. 4,000 donors. If you do an analysis of the people who contribute to my campaign, I probably have more people from Korea, more people from China, more people from the Caribbean, African American, Uzbekistan, Russian speaking. I'm one of the most diverse candidates. And now that Eric has learned the rules, play it legally, those who have benefited from it are all of a sudden saying, we want to change the rules of the game. I feel like Will Chamberlain, just because I'm scoring 100 points, I'm learning your rules. These are your rules. They grew up in this industry. So all I'm doing is learning the legal rules that are played. Our real estate industry pays almost $32 billion a year in taxes. It pays more than half of the taxes in the city of New York. We need to hold them accountable. But I'm not going to go to them and say, listen, I don't like you, so don't pay your taxes. We need to stop this silliness of, where you get money from real estate. We have 35,000. Think about this for a moment. We have 35,000 nonprofits in the city, 600,000 employees, $33.6 billion in payroll that's put into the city because of those nonprofits. Who's donating those nonprofits? People who have been successful. They come back and they say, listen, I want to be a part of the Robin Hood Foundation. I want to contribute to these various PALs and Boys Club. So we don't need to divide the city. We need to tell people, darn it, you need to do your part. And you're not going to be disruptive. You're not going to treat people unfairly. We're going to hold you accountable. And in some cases, we're going to call you to pay more.
Okay.
So last question about the game here. Bill de Blasio has played the game very well and legally as it's been determined.
Well, that remains to be seen, but go ahead.
After prosecutors have looked at things and scolded him and so on, he also figured out how the new game worked before anyone else, which was garbled because Mike Bloomberg wasn't playing the game.
Yes.
And so Bill figured out how to use outside money successfully, or people figured out how to help him with that when he became mayor in a way no one else figured. And that ended up really kneecapping Christine Quinn. This is history.
Right.
The thing I'm reading now, and I don't know anything, you might, is that there's a set of deals in which Bill de Blasio leaves, Chirlane McCray, his wife, becomes the next borough president of Brooklyn with your endorsement, and Bill de Blasio mayor endorses you for mayor as he goes.
Right.
Fill me in on that, just between us.
And I'm so glad you're asking these
Just
questions.
friends.
You know that? I'm so glad. First of all, I'm the only person in New York City outside of Senator Gillibrand who's saying, let's take money out of politics altogether. I don't want to call up anyone. I don't want to make these 30,000 calls to raise money. There should be no money in politics. If you take money out of politics altogether, no more fundraising, no more calling, you would allow any and everyone to be able to stand up and run and have their voices heard. It's unfair that people, if you can't raise $3 million, that you can't be heard. It's not right. But no one wants to talk about that. Second, I never met with the mayor. I never met with his wife. We've never had a conversation about her. How someone writes a story after they spoke with me and I said it never happened. It's one thing if I would have said that, hey, we had a conversation. I don't want to go into the details. Got it. I never spoke with the mayor about his wife running for borough president. Never. We never had the conversation. But this is all of the part of the Eric Adams thing that's going on. You know, there's people in the corner of this city that say, you know what, we know that bald-headed guy, and we're going to do everything we can. We're going to write stories. We're going to even say his comments on Martin Luther King Day were racist. Like there are no black people in Ohio. Listen, I'm not a racist. I know I'm not a racist, but I'm not going to fly around the city trying to tell people I'm not a racist. People are going to look at my life story. My life story has been a story of fighting for people who have been treated unfairly. That is my legacy. And it's not about being elected mayor, because I'm a big believer. What the universe intends for you, you will get. If it's not intended for you, you're not going to get it. I'm going to live my life. Losing the mayorship is not important. Losing who I am is. I've always been successful by being Eric Adams. I'm going to continue to be successful by being Eric Adams.
Eric Adams.
To Eric Adams. So this is clearly, with ranked choice voting, I'm fascinated to see how 2021 shakes out. Okay, so I have some quick questions.
Yeah.
They're not yes or no's, but they're just kind of one-word answers, if you will.
Yes.
Okay, when was the last time you took the subway?
All the time. I'm a MetroCard guy. My staff laughs all the time. People stop all the time. I love the subway system.
Yesterday, last week, last month?
This morning.
What's the last bus you took?
The B36.
Okay. When was the last time you went to a museum, not when you were on the job?
Haven't been to the museum in a while, I would say a year.
Okay. I'm a board member of the Tenement Museum, so you should come on down and see our new exhibit.
We should duplicate the whole tenement concept. It's a good concept.
It's a great concept. What's the last beach you went to?
Coney Island. You know, I do the polar bear plunge.
Oh, you don't do the hot dog eating contest?
Now like that. I'm a vegan. Let's say give me a vegan dog.
I know. What's the best part of New York City?
It's people.
Okay.
It's people.
New and old. New and old.
New and old. It's people. It's people. It's a great fun, man. Brooklyn, you could go into a Mexican restaurant, have a Russian cook make you a German meal that he learned from his Polish girlfriend. It's the people.
And what's the worst part of New York City?
Our inability to just greet each other in a warm way. Just a hello goes a long way.
All right. Well, thank you, President Adams, a.k.a. Eric, and thank you for spending some time with your constituents this morning.
Thank you. Great,
appreciate it.
Great topics.
Thank you.
All right.
FAQ.
I'm trying to find what I was just saying, but now I can't find it. So I have to do it off the cuff. Hi there. Welcome to FAQ.NYC. We're a production of Racket Media, and we're supported by listeners like you. Thank you so much for tuning in. We are headquartered at the Mcsilver Institute for Poverty Policy and Research at NYU. We recorded this week at 321 Canal Street, where we are hosting Don't Bury the Lead. A special thank you goes to our executive producer, Alex Brook Lynn, and our episode producer this week, Adam Chimera. A very, very special thank you goes out to the Brooklyn Borough President, Eric Adams. Thank you for tuning in. Go Brooklyn.